I saw myself on TV and I looked like a skeleton. I then realized that the martial arts I was doing weren't leading me in a good direction. But who could have known that 5 years later, after a long and difficult journey, I will change in such a way that people who knew me couldn't even recognize me anymore. My journey began when I was still a young kid. I always wanted to be a fighter, but while I had the tenacity and somewhat of a warrior spirit, I wasn't born a natural fighter. Instead, I grew up as a sickly child, spending many days in bed with a fever, and I regularly got bullied inside and outside of school. My fascination for martial arts did not disappear though, and once a friend of mine invited me to try out martial arts, I said yes. I fell in love with martial arts from the get-go. It had everything I ever wanted: samurai clothes and swords, a mystical philosophy, complicated martial arts techniques. It had everything besides actual fighting. But back then, I didn't realize that this essential piece was missing from the picture. Instead, I devoted myself to training and became fanatical about it. While initially school was my priority and martial arts was a side thing, eventually things switched around and martial arts became a priority and school a side thing. In fact, I became so obsessed with martial arts that I even chose to pursue it as my career. Instead of going to a university right after school, I moved to a different country to live in a full-time martial arts dojo as a live-in student. And here I discovered martial arts on a whole new level. While my initial dojo back home had some Eastern mysticism and philosophy, here it was a whole different game. In my new dojo, I met a lifelong martial arts instructor, one we refer to as sensei, who had traveled the whole world and lived in such places as a martial arts school in Japan and monasteries in India and Nepal. I learned not only about martial arts from my new sensei, but also about yogic diet and lifestyle. The only thing which was still missing from my practice was still actual fighting. But that did not yet cross my mind. Instead, I became even more obsessed with spirituality and personal development in martial arts, and a few years later managed to open up my own full-time martial arts, yoga, and meditation school. Here, I continue to be a devoted spiritual martial artist, not only in my dojo, but also outside of it. Yet no matter how much I practiced and how many yogic diets I tried, I was still a sickly, skinny guy, as I was getting sick regularly, at least once a few months. Little did I know that the next diet I will try will change everything. I became exposed to the new diet as I was sharing a flat with a Tibetan medicine doctor. As I was regularly sick in my bed, one day he knocked on my door and asked if I would like to try out a medicinal Tibetan herb tea. I was skeptical about it at first, but figured I have nothing to lose by drinking it. And after I did, I had the impression I felt better. So the next time the Tibetan medicine doctor offered me his medicinal tea, I drank it again, and then again. And every time I did, I seemed to feel better. So when he invited me to drop by his room for him to do a Tibetan medicine examination on me, I said yes. Now this was probably one of the weirdest things I ever did. I had to bring him a jar of fresh pea in the morning and even leave my stool in the toilet for him to check the color of it. Not something I would typically expect to do with a roommate. Once I did all of that, he started examining me. He checked my pulse, my tongue, then pressed a few places on my stomach, and after that, he described me his guess at my medical history. And to my surprise, he seemed to be extremely accurate. My curiosity piqued, so when he told me his suggestions how to improve my health, I committed to following them unconditionally right away. Unfortunately, I didn't yet know that that's when things will start to go wrong. But not from the very start, as I was introduced to avoid eating after 6 p.m. and to avoid plenty of various food products such as sugar, wheat, milk, and some types of meats and vegetables. For the first few months doing so, I felt incredible, and I didn't get sick even once. I didn't care that sometimes I didn't even have a chance to eat during a busy day, and once 6 p.m. hit, I didn't eat anything anymore. On other occasions, since I had a strict diet, if someone offered me food that wasn't part of my diet, I refused to eat and didn't mind skipping a meal either. And while for the first 6 months, the results were positive, eventually they began to deteriorate. I lost a lot of weight, my skin became pale, and I started getting sick frequently again. Yet I wasn't ready to admit it, even though a lot of people were telling me I didn't look healthy anymore. Instead, I was telling them that this was the price of being healthy. Even though I was getting sick again and didn't feel good, I thought that this was the result of me not following the diet closely enough. So I doubled down on it even more. The fact that I was discouraged from doing physical training by my martial arts instructor wasn't helping me either. He was encouraging me to believe that doing yoga was enough for my body. Yet I learned only years later that most yoga practice is not enough to build strength and muscle, as many of its styles focus mainly on light exercise and stretching only. which is not enough to build muscle. My martial art wasn't helping me keeping fit and strong either, as I was mostly just doing rolls, light techniques, and no physical resistance training. Or I was pointing fingers at my students, telling them what they should do. Finally though, a moment of truth came about. As I gave an entry for television and after I saw myself on TV, I was shocked. I literally looked like a skeleton, and I looked so bad that I couldn't deny it anymore. I had to admit that whatever I was doing wasn't good for me. So immediately, I started eating everything I had in my kitchen. And I'm being serious when I'm telling you that I didn't stop eating for 2 whole days. Every time I finished a meal, 30 minutes later, I wanted to eat more, until eventually, I cleaned up all of my food storages and had to go buy more. Slowly, I started gaining my weight back. But I was still feeling neither fit nor healthy. And I then realized that there was one element missing from my approach to looking after my body. It was science. I was relying on Eastern mysticism and philosophy to keep myself fit and healthy. But finally, it occurred to me that many of the things I was taught were not tested or proven. That led me to start questioning my whole spiritual journey. Yet the final shock came to me in martial arts themselves. As I was walking together with my martial arts students in the city late at night, a shirtless, buff guy approached our group and began intimidating us. All of my students' eyes turned to me as they expected their martial arts master to defend them. But the truth was, I was intimidated myself. Because deep inside, I knew that I never learned fighting, and I had no clue what to do if I was really attacked. After all I was doing were mystified techniques that had no real application. Finally, one of my students stepped up instead and began shouting at the aggressor, causing him to reconsider and walk away. Luckily, the situation ended safely, but I saw in the eyes of my students that they lost all of their faith in me. And I can't blame them. As their martial arts instructor, I was supposed to know what to do in such a situation, but I didn't. Still to this day, it is the most embarrassing moment in my life. Yet it caused me to realize that I need to change not only my diet and approach to training, I need to change my martial arts journey as well. I need to finally try to learn what I always wanted to learn. Fighting. Yet doing that was far from easy. I decided to go to mixed martial arts, where I was the skinniest guy around. Not only that, an MMA gym was far from my usual environment. I was used to peaceful and serene martial arts dojos full of nice and gentle people. My own personality was soft, peaceful, and gentle too. Yet here I was suddenly surrounded by tough guys who all looked like sharks to me. Needless to say, I didn't feel very confident. I also didn't know what I should say or how should I act. Instead, I kept quiet and did my best to train as best as I can. Yet the more I trained with these guys, the more I started to realize that they are actually nice people, but they still had something intangible that I didn't. It was a mix of confidence and presence that they held, which I didn't, and I was concerned if I ever would. But I decided to continue to train nevertheless and to find out the answer. I ended up quitting the martial art that I was doing entirely and closed my dojo. I then decided to pursue my fighting training full time. I moved to the States to do a 6 months intensive MMA training camp, during which I said goodbye to my long hairstyle, because my long hair kept getting in the way during training way too much. Then after the 6 months, I had an MMA fight in the cage, and as my next step, I decided to move to Ireland to train together with professional MMA fighters. Now that was an experience of the next level. While I was intimidated by the regular MMA guys in my first MMA gym and in the United States, here I was spending time with fighters of the highest level who were living and breathing fighting. I was more intimidated than ever. But the more time I spent with them, the more I realized that behind the scary facade, they were all nice people. Of course, there were also people who could easily kill me in a matter of minutes if they decided to. But what was even more interesting was that when I was spending the whole day hanging out with a UFC fighter, I realized that I'm interesting to these guys too. And the more time I spent with them, the more comfortable I started to feel around them. And that's when things started to change. Eventually, other people began complimenting me on my changed physique, mentioning that I look ripped. Some people who knew me from before didn't even recognize me in the street anymore, as others told me that even my voice tone changed. The more I was training and fighting, the more confident I began feeling too, and the positive changes just kept coming. I became much more difficult to intimidate, and I finally learned what I always wanted to learn: fighting. But what I found most fascinating is that the nice guy that I used to be didn't disappear. I'm still calm, gentle, and caring, but now if somebody needs protecting, I know I won't back down. If you want to see how training boxing for 30 days changed me in unexpected ways, click on this video right here. Thanks for watching and keep owning your journey.